Uh, Hello, good morning. Today, our guest is Jayman, and we're going to be talking about some rather controversial issues. So, Jayman, you write for a publication known as the Hunt Review.
Yes.
Recently, I interviewed Ron Hunt, and Jayman, tell us a little about yourself. Where are you from?
Well, my, I am a second generation Jamaican. My parents uh, came came from Jamaica a few years before I was born. I grew up in New York in the South Bronx. Um, I left New York several years ago, and yeah, I had an interest in human evolution and human biology and psychology, and along with many other things. And I talked about that in my blog and um, another interview I did once before. And yeah, that's me.
Okay, all right, Jayman. And Jayman, what did you study in college, if you went to college?
I studied physics actually.
Oh, great. You studied physics. So you studied physics and you are a professional. So we know that you're a writer. We don't know what you do, but I assume that you have strong quantitative skills.
Excuse me, I managed.
Okay, you manage. All right. So, J-Man, the first topic we're going to discuss is male homosexuality. What is the
Oh boy, we're going in strong. All right.
Yes, what is the cause of male homosexuality? There's this brilliant writer from Greece. I plan to interview him at some point, but the interview will be a written interview. I don't think that he wants to speak. You should know him. He
Mhm.
likes to talk about single people. But tell us your view.
All right. Well, the issue with homosexuality, particularly male homosexuality, is that it's an evolutionary puzzle. It is highly deleterious to fitness, and what I mean by that it is um, it reduces the number of descendants the the homosexual has, because historically homosexual men would have had fewer children than heterosexual men. And yes, I know some people say yes, homosexuals have had children, but in the when you sum it all over, you're going to find they're going to have fewer number of children. Now that leads to an evolutionary paradox, because that means any genes that cause such a thing should have been selected out. I mean, even a 1% fitness loss, when multiplied over generations, eventually goes to, to about zero. So it shouldn't exist. And, and what's even more puzzling is that it seems to occur at a relatively high frequency. I mean, studies wiggle around what the exact percentage is, but we get something in the vicinity of 3% of all men being homosexual. Now, if that is something that's highly deleterious evolutionarily, and it is, and such would be strongly selected against, it shouldn't be so common. So that led some people, particularly um, Gregory Cochrane and Paul Ewald, to write a paper about it. It was published in the year 2000 on pathogens being responsible for a lot of human ailments. Because pathogen or an infectious agent could explain the problem, because if there is some kind of evolutionary pressure selecting away from homosexuality, if you have something that's being selected for on its own, like the pathogen is being selected as well, you have kind of arms race. So even if there are genes that are selecting against susceptibility to homosexuality, if the pathogen is also being selected to infect the host, then you could have homosexuality be prevalent in the population at that relatively high rate. Um, the idea is that the pathogen, it's an infectious agent that's probably relatively common, um, that doesn't result in homosexuality most of the time. Only as certain things have to go a certain way for that to happen. Um, the infection could cause some kind of damage in brain tissue that may damage neural circuits um, that are used for sexual attraction, and it may cause dormant circuits. The idea is that maybe the brain normally possesses circuits for attraction to either sex. It's just activated one way depending on what sex the individual is. And the infection could damage the circuits that are for attraction to women, and it could cause same sex attraction in these men. Um, yeah, and that would explain the prevalence that we see.
J-Man, you're saying that male homosexuality has deleterious effects. And for our viewers who are not familiar with evolutionary biology, you explain the concept of fitness. But fitness is a broad concept, J-Man, because remember, numerous studies have actually shown that male homosexuals are promiscuous, and they also have a relatively high rate of diseases. Thirdly, there is no evidence, and I repeat, J-Man, there is no evidence to conclusively suggest that male homosexuals are depressed due to discrimination. What based on what I've been reading, the evidence is indicating that homosexuality could be a consequence of a psychological problem, and homosexuals are actually higher in what people refer to as the dark triad traits. So even homosexuals who live in affluent countries, they suffer from relatively high risk of depression. So some people may feel badly as a result of discrimination, but there isn't compelling evidence to indicate that discrimination is driving mental health problems in that community.
Yeah, so at least certainly in the present day. I mean, obviously homosexuals were, I mean, were in the Western countries, homosexuals were discriminated against in times past, but certainly in the last few decades, the discrimination has lessened, and in some cases may have reversed, and some might argue that it might have reversed in some cases. But yeah, despite this, even in Western countries, we still see higher rates of mental illness in homosexuals, which would be, I mean, it's it is what is Gregory Cochrane refers to as a Darwinian disease. It is something that negatively impacts evolutionary fitness in any conceivable historical environment. There is no historical environment where you would have been better off being homosexual. Um, so that contrasts with something like, say, um, probably the biggest example would be the modern use of birth control. Um, you know, or the basic desire for sex in general. I mean, today, sex and fertility are sort of decoupled because we have birth control. But in the past, you know, people are driven not. I mean, we do want kids for their own sake, but they're driven more for their desire for sex. And if in the past, since there's no birth control, that desire would have been enough to cause you to have more offspring. But today, it doesn't as much. So to see that there's certain traits that lead to reduced fitness in today's world where we have birth control. That's not as much of a puzzle as, say, homosexuality that would have led to reduced fitness even in the past. So that's why it's so mysterious to explain, um, and hence the idea of the pathogen theory. Pathogen theory is pretty broad actually, because a lot of the problems that humans or any living organism faces could be due to pathogen stress. Like we've done a lot of work in modern world of reducing some of the illnesses that uh, affected society, and a lot of that was due to cutting out pathogens, through vaccines, antibiotics, to improve sanitation, things like that. But certain things persist, like cancer, heart disease, and things like that. And Cochrane and Ewald argue in their paper that those things are as well probably related to pathogen stress. I mean, we know that's certainly true in cases of certain cancers, um, such as certain lymphomas, which are caused by infectious agents, cervical cancer, which is caused by human papillomavirus. Um, Recently, we confirmed the link between multiple sclerosis and Epstein-Barr virus, which causes mono. Um, So he believes if we dig into this more, we're going to find a lot of these illnesses that we suffer are caused by pathogenic stress.
Pathogens are important. They have a negative impact on institutional formation, individualism, and innovation. And we do have studies on the topic, many of them by anthropologists and economists. But we're still on the topic of male homosexuality. So, some time ago, literally, maybe a year or more than a year ago, I was sitting by myself and I was thinking, and I said, maybe homosexuality promotes pro sociality. And then I'm online doing research, and I stumbled upon this article titled Pro Sociality and a Sociosexual Hypothesis for the Evolution of Same Sex Attractions in Humans by Andrew B. Barron and Brian Eyre. And the thesis is that homosexuality promotes pro sociality and group cooperation, and male homosexuality in particular, this is primarily my opinion, male homosexuality in particular reduces violence. So homosexual men on average are not as violent as heterosexual men. So male homosexuality, it reduces violence and competition for women. So that could be a positive effect of homosexuality. Are you familiar with this idea?
I've heard something similar. The problem is that with theories like that, it's that the math doesn't work out evolutionarily. Um, that relies on a type of of group selection that somehow traits that are harmful to the individual can somehow get promoted because they benefit the group. But there's no way really to get that to work because even if there's something that some individuals do that somehow causes their group to benefit, if they themselves don't benefit evolutionarily, if it doesn't lead those individuals that have the trait to have more offspring, the trait is still going to disappear in the population because the ones who carry it aren't reproducing or they're reproducing less. So it would eventually still be selected out. Um, so unfortunately, theories like that rely on that type of group selection or don't really work. Um, and they can't really explain what we see.
Jayman, have you been interrogating the literature on the link between male homosexuality and intelligence? And again, I'm specifically referring to male homosexuality and intelligence because when studies aim to address the association between homosexuality and intelligence, the results usually show that there's a link between male homosexuality and intelligence and not necessarily female homosexuality.
That's funny. I because I saw the reverse that female homosexuals were slightly more intelligent.
Well,
It is
that's funny. It's funny, Jayman, because
it
if you type in homosexuality and intelligence, you're going to see tons of studies about male homosexuality and intelligence.
yeah. I think the results are kind of mixed on that because I've seen some that show there's no link and then there's others that do show a link. So I'm not sure where it. I mean, you might have identification issues and sampling issues, so that it might depend on how they draw their samples. I priority, I would imagine that they wouldn't be a link. But who knows? Maybe there is, and um, it might be something modest.
I would say there's a
I,
modest link.
Most likely, I suspect is a type of identification bias. Those that are likely to actually identify as such are probably more likely to be smarter. Um, yeah. Uh,
Yes,
yeah, I'm
you're
not sure.
right.
Yeah, the literature is not clear on that. So I'd have to really dig into that to see where that actually stands.
But remember, male homosexuals are still a small part of the male population. So maybe they perform higher than what we would expect due to their size. That,
Possibly,
yeah, that could
possibly.
be an issue. I don't like to rely on anecdotes, but homosexuals are usually intelligent. The people I've met who are gay, they're usually intelligent. And the ones who
Yeah,
become hyper successful tend to be intelligent. So again,
Well, yeah, but I mean, is
it's
that a
just more
function? Is that a
that no that
function?
no it could be another issue. So
Yeah, I mean, is that a function of the
Satoshi,
homosexuality or a function of the intelligence? So
yes,
that's
Satoshi
hard to
said
say.
that people who engage in novel activities tend to be more intelligent. I'm still trying to work out the logic behind male homosexuality
Oh,
and its
you,
link.
yeah, I mean, Satoshi Kanazawa.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes.
um, yeah, yeah. I'm not sure how his Savannah hypothesis he calls it.
No,
I'm
we're not
not
talking
sure.
about the savannah.
Yeah,
We're talking about the evolutionary novel traits and
yeah, that's
intelligence.
that. Yeah,
Yes, yes.
that's his Savannah
Not
hypothesis.
practices.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much stock I put
Well,
into
that
that
was
actually.
critique, it was critiqued by
Yeah,
some of his colleagues. I remember the name now. But it's an issue that I find interesting. And male homosexuals do experience more discrimination than female homosexuals. And this is an empirical fact.
yes.
So sometimes I wonder that maybe they're going to be more open to new ideas and experiences because because male homosexuals experience such high levels of discrimination. To say that you're a male homosexual publicly could also indicate that you're high in openness and other traits that could be linked to intelligence and innovation, but that's a different debate. But
Yeah.
I'm still, as I said, I'm still working out the logic behind it, why this link would exist.
You
No,
mentioned that. You mentioned that interesting fact, right? The narrative currently between homosexuals is that they're born that way, which is probably not true
exactly. I would
because
just continue,
the
but
the heritability of same-sex attraction is abnormally low. It's like 22%. You know, the heritability of most traits are in the excess of 60, 70, 80%. And for same-sex attraction, it's in the 20s, which is unusual. And oddly enough, the heritability of homophobia is actually more around 50%. So
as
it's
expected.
yeah, it's more true to say that people who are homophobes are born that way
Yes,
than the homosexuals
exactly.
themselves.
Because
That which is the
remember,
irony.
homophobia is a feature of a personality trait.
Yes.
So openness is one personality trait. Being insular or hesitant to experience new experiences, or what people would call being a conservative, that's another personality trait. And the personality trait of conservatism has various brands, and homophobia is linked to tradition. So what you're saying is quite plausible. And I do agree with your position on the low heritability of homosexuality, because I was reading an article and the writer did say that male not necessarily male homosexuality, but homosexuality could be mostly environmental. There is a study saying that scientists are yet to identify the genes that are linked to homosexuality, but this is not a particularly important point because
Well, actually, that
let me tell you why I'm saying that
yeah.
why
Go
I'm
ahead.
saying this, because genes work in tandem with each other. So there isn't a specific gene that's responsible for you hating other people or being conservative. So the fact that scientists haven't found a gay gene isn't that interesting to me, but they did say that genes working together can lead to homosexuals. That's what the study said.
Yeah, I mean, for most traits, it's actually known the fourth law of behavioral genetics. For most traits, uh, a large number of genes are responsible for the trait. I mean, not all the genes, it's not the whole genome, but for a lot of traits are distributed over a large number of genes. Like height would be one example where uh, there is a very large number of alleles that uh, lead to human height, which is kind of surprising to think that would be a simple trait. Turns out it's not. IQ is another one. And would imagine the same would be true for any personality traits or certainly for sexual orientation. I mean, obviously, everything has some genetic influence. There's nothing that has zero heritability. I mean, there's going to be some genetic influence on it, but it's just in the case of sexual orientation, it's abnormally weak. Um, but the interesting thing about that is, it's yes, that the article was quite right that the influence of homosexuality is, by definition, predominantly environmental. That um, if you have in the case of identical twins, if there's you have a pair of twins where one of the twins is gay, there's a 75% chance that the other one is straight, which is highly unusual when you know anything about identical twins, that they're usually highly similar in almost every trait. To the point that twins reared apart can end up taking a vacation to the same place within a few weeks of one another, unbeknownst to the other. So, so that kind of discordance between twins is highly unusual, um,
And
which definitely does
this
point to an environmental cause, a very strong environmental component.
the study is titled Large Scale GWAS Reveals Insights into the Genetic Architecture of Same-Sex Sexual Behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a study arguing that there is no specific gene that's linked to homosexuality. So on this show, I like to cite studies. People who listen to us are appreciative of the fact that we know what we're talking about, but they're usually the naysayers who are ignorant people who assume that some some dissident researchers might just be making up the data, but this is not the case based on my research. What dissidents say to be true, it's usually true.
Yeah, they're certainly right. They're not making it up. The data exists. Uh, you know, obviously some researchers and some voices are more reliable than others, but yeah, this the research into the genetics, it's so hard to talk about genetics and heritability that where our knowledge is and where the public discourse is are really far apart. Um, you know, the public is very unaware of where. I mean, even academic public, right? If you ask a lot of academics of what the facts are on human evolution and uh, the role of heredity in behavioral traits, they unless they're actually specialists in this, they won't have any idea, which is unfortunate.
Yes, it's really unfortunate. Even today, there are so many people who still doubt IQ research and its validity.
Indeed. IQ being like the single most substantiated thing in all of psychology.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
It has not been affected by the replicability crisis in psychology.
No, if anything, it's been strengthened. So
There are actually studies saying that IQ is valid. People actually do research to prove the validity of IQ. People like Charles, and I'm not referring to Charles Murray. That's the last name of the researcher. I think it's Jennifer
yep,
Charles.
yep.
And the IQ is a robust predictor of so many social outcomes.
It is. It is.
So now we're going to talk about female homosexuality, lesbianism. Your take on
Okay.
lesbianism is quite interesting. And yes, women are more likely to be bisexual than men. Men tend to be more exclusive. Again, this is
Yes.
a fact.
Yes. I mean, yeah, again, studies are kind of mixed here, but when it comes to male sexual orientation, there seems to be, they seem to be more gathered at extremes. That you're either completely straight or completely gay, with relatively few men being attracted to either sex. So they certainly exist, but the distribution is definitely more tilted toward extremes. Whereas in female same-sex attraction, um, those who aren't completely heterosexual tend to be more bisexual. Exclusively homosexual females tend to be relatively uncommon. I mean, even those outright identifying as lesbians nowadays has plummeted in just the last few years, even. Because there's so many new identifications, various forms of non-binary, et cetera, that seem to have subsumed the category of lesbian. Um, yeah, it is female same-sex attraction is less clear on its cause, and I think less of mysterious. I mean, in the terms of evolutionary sense, because while today it does negatively impact on fitness, it probably didn't historically, or at least certainly not to the extent that male same-sex attraction did, because women that women do compete for the other sex, but not to the same extent that uh, men have to compete for women. So the competition is not fierce. Um, so it's a little less mysterious. And my thought of what's going on here is that um, I wrote about this once that the one possible explanation, and certainly if you look at it, that female bisexuals or any of those who have a non-heterosexual orientation is because due to a slight degree of masculinization. Um, if you look at, there was one study that looked at facial features of men and women,
Yeah, I
and
know. Yeah, I know that study.
yeah,
I'm familiar with it.
yeah, yeah, they found that uh, the distribution among women is broader than men in terms of gender conformity. That male faces are more masculine than female faces are more feminine. So you have a larger tail of females that have masculine features in their faces. And that could be a cue to a general masculinization. And you find that women who have a non heterosexual orientation display more features, more masculine features. They tend to look more masculine. They tend to have much higher sex drives. They tend to have much higher number of sexual partners. And uh, it could be that limited degree of masculinization could have had something to do with gender orientation, which there probably wasn't such a tight evolutionary selective force, on sexual orientation for women than there was for men, because it wasn't as important for them to be totally focused on being attracted to the opposite sex. It's not as deleterious for them. But I'm fully admit that's speculation, really. I mean, the situation with female same-sex attraction is much less clear than what's going on with male
Yes.
sexual attraction, same-sex attraction.
So there's a study by the Frontiers in Psychology published by Guy Madison and Michael Woodley.
Hmm.
Somebody else is also called Ulrika Asa and John Wallert. I don't know if it's
Hmm.
German, so if it's German, it would be it's Swedish. And
Hmm.
this study is saying that feminist activist women are masculinized.
Hmm.
So not all feminists are lesbian,
Yeah,
but some of them are.
yeah, I remember that study. If it's the one I think about, Woodley did, where he did digit ratios.
Yes.
Um, I'm not sure digit ratios are real. I mean that, like, yeah, I'm not sure that the empirical data on that is mixed on whether or not that is, that for those that aren't aware, that's the ratio of the length of the index finger to the ring finger, and the idea is that it's supposed to be men have a shorter index finger than their ring fingers than women do. Um, I'm not sure that's actually true, but that's what they found. They went to a feminist conference and they did digit ratios measures, and they found that they had like more male tilted ratios. Um, even if they, well, my credit, I'm not a big fan of Woodley's work in general. I mean,
Why? Why are
yeah,
you?
why? Because Woodley's conclusions that from his original research are usually wrong. Um, so yeah, certainly because he did a paper a while ago saying that average IQs of Westerners have fell by like one standard deviation from like the past 100 years, and that's simply impossible. There's no way that could have happened. You know.
Yeah,
Uh,
I know he did. Yeah, I've read
yeah,
several of his papers. He has a paper on the decline in the quality of vocabulary. That
yeah,
paper
no,
is
no.
interesting because words like intellectual, nationalism, jingoism are relatively new words, but they're sophisticated words. And recently, we have been seeing an influx of words like bootylicious, words that are reflective of popular culture. So these words don't indicate high general ability. So I do agree with him that the quality of vocabulary has declined.
Yeah, but I mean that's more of a result of democratization of basically
Language,
academic, right,
yes.
language and
And
academic
but
thought.
IQ scores are falling even
Yeah, I mean, average
Even
IQs have
environmentalists argue that IQ scores are falling.
genotypic IQ has probably gone down like a few points over the last 100 years. Maybe 1 or 2 points, but they certainly didn't go down a
But
whole
that
standard
that's
deviation.
it's not that large.
Right. But anyway, um, even if back to the feminists and the digit ratios, even if he had found that this is the case, that these feminists have more masculine digit ratios, the problem is he went to a conference. So you're gonna get them,
The most
you
extreme people.
right, exactly. They're not exactly going to be the most representative of feminists. Now that I could say from anecdotal experience that yes, I can say that women more likely to be a feminist probably is going to be less feminine than the average female, but you know that's not the best way to actually measure it. But yeah, um,
And the empathy could also be impacting male homosexuality. So news-wise, I read this study some time ago. Somebody called Simone Chamay. She and their co-authors did the study, and they say that empathetic men are more likely to be homosexual. Yes, and
yeah,
yeah, and I've seen.
I can see that. I mean,
I agree.
yeah, I mean, obviously, if you do psychological profiles of heterosexual men versus homosexual men, you're going to come up with a whole bunch of differences. Um,
Yeah,
you know,
women are higher in empathy than men. PNAS has
yes,
a study on the topic. So women are higher in empathy, and if men are also higher in empathy, it could be easier for them to bond and develop relationships with other men. So I could see higher
I
levels of male empathy leading to homosexuality or
yeah
some
yeah.
intensive homosocial bond.
You see, I could see
But then
those
there are
things.
lots of homosexual men
Right.
who are not empathetic, who are really cold and emotionally distant.
Yes. I mean, you're going to find differences if you look at the psychological profiles. You're going to find the differences between heterosexual men and homosexual men, but those differences aren't causal. I mean, that's the result, not the cause. Um, you know, so whatever is causing homosexuality is causing these men to be different in a certain set of ways, on average. Um, so to assume that that is, I mean, even if that was the case, that if you find, oh, that's going to lead to social bonding, then it's going to be back to a group selection thing, which doesn't work. I
Yeah,
mean, it
you're
can't
not
explain what you're doing.
you're not fond of group selection. Why?
No, because it doesn't work mathematically. I mean, because um, selection, like if you are doing if a trait you possess is benefiting your group, so it's benefiting others in your group, leading to them to have increased fitness. But if it's not leading you to have increased fitness, you're the one who possesses the gene for those traits. This trait is going to be lost from the group over time, because those traits reduce fitness of those who carry them. So even if the group benefits, if it doesn't benefit the individual and the individual's descendants and very immediate close blood relatives, then you know the trait's not going to be selected for. So
So
there's no way to make group selection work mathematically.
so have you been reading David Sloan Wilson's work?
The names sound familiar.
Yeah, he's a famous evolutionary anthropologist. He writes in favor of multi-level selection.
Yeah. I've seen things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. In general, it doesn't work in humans. Um, you can work in ants or something like that, where the relationship between different worker ants, they share like 75% of their genes. You can have kind of selection where the traits are selected for because they benefit the group better than the individual because of the extremely high level of relationship between individuals. But humans aren't that closely related to other humans, so you're just not going to have that kind of selection in humans.
Interesting point. It's a topic that I am going to study in more detail, primarily because I am interested in religion.
Hmm.
Evolutionary anthropologists have noted that religions enable societies to scale up, but this has not yet trickled down to the average man or even trickled up to the intelligent to intellectual, the intelligentsia.
Hmm.
Many yes, many in intellectual communities think that religion is actually bad for growth and bad for society. But
But it
religion,
depends on that depends on what you mean by bad, right? If you mean by in terms of a society's wealth and technological development, all those things, then yeah,
it
it's
depends
negative.
on the religion. It all depends
But
on the
if you,
religion because
I mean,
many studies have found a positive link between Christianity and human capital formation. So it all depends on the
yeah,
religion.
yeah, but see that
Many
that's
studies
what.
done by people who are not religious any at all, who are
Well,
stunned
hold
by
on.
the belief.
That was going to be my next point. But if you mean by in terms of fitness, like in terms of number of offspring, then yes, religion definitely has a positive effect because religious people, certainly in today's world, have way more children on average than non-religious people do. And the effect on Christian now about that, now that's a whole other topic there. So the effect of Christianity on prosperity isn't isn't direct. Christianity, especially the type of Christianity found in northwestern Europe, um, has created a type of selective force. So this is the work of a blogger known as HBD Chick. This is what she talks about. She advanced a theory of selection that took place in the Middle Ages in primarily northwestern Europe. That is Europe in the area of surrounding the North Sea, going as far south as northern Spain and northern Italy, and going as far east as probably about eastern Germany. You find a region of Europe that has that certainly since the Middle Ages has been a center of technology and development and scientific. This is the place that invented science.
Yes.
The science that we know. All these things come from northwestern Europe. And her theory is that the Catholic Church um, banned cousin marriages.
Joseph Henrich, that's Joseph Henrich theory.
Yeah. Joseph Harris talked about this, but HBD took uh, incorporated the selective effect of the manor system, which they also adopted. It's a set of series of downstream effects. The banning of cousin marriage serves to break up the clan nature of societies at those times. When the Germanic people who occupied former Roman lands had like a clan system based on kindreds, um, banning cousin marriages forced people to look outside of their clan for mates, and this eventually, it made people more atomized because when you're in a clan society, relative relatedness between individuals is higher because most of the people in your society are actually your blood relatives, and that creates a different set of selective pressures than it does when most of the people aren't necessarily your blood relatives. So this leads to the formation of the manor system, where you have well, I wouldn't say they're free employees, but still employers that are mobile between lands, where the individual has to rely on himself rather than his family for support. And iterate that over generations, you have a society where individuality and individual ability are more valued than conformity to a clan system. And I mean, this form of Christianity that arose here, I mean, you see this with eventually with the Protestant Reformation, where a lot of the traits associated with Protestantism, like the Protestant work ethic and having one's personal relationship to God rather than having a relationship between the church.
Exactly. Jayman, we're going to do a part 2 immediately, so I'm going to close this link and send another link.
Okay,
All right.
that's good.